While I was eating dinner on a humid Tuesday evening in Little Rock, my phone suddenly rang on the kitchen table. My name is Lily Brooks. I'm 32 years old, and that single phone call completely shattered my family. I picked up the call from my younger brother. The moment I answered, his voice came through icy and calculating. "Grandpa passed away this morning," he said flatly. "He left his entire timber estate to me. You won't get a single dime." Before I could even process his cold words, I heard my parents cheering in the background. My father gave a harsh laugh while my mother blurted out, "Finally, that girl is out of the picture." Instead of crying or arguing, I silently tapped the screen and switched the call to video. I tilted my phone toward the man sitting right beside me. My grandfather, Arthur Brooks, was casually cutting a piece of grilled steak. He raised his eyes, took a slow bite, and looked directly into the camera. My brother's face turned ghostly pale the instant he saw him. My parents' laughter froze instantly. Across the table, my grandfather wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned closer to the screen. "Before you clean out my estate, sweetheart, mind letting me finish my dinner first?" My brother muttered something in complete panic before slamming the phone down. If you want to see how this dramatic family betrayal unfolds, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to support the channel. 20 minutes after the video call ended in complete silence, my phone began buzzing continuously with frantic calls from Mom and Dad. I set the phone face down on the granite counter and let it vibrate until the screen finally went dark. Across the table, my grandfather calmly finished his steak, casually wiping his hands with a napkin, as if my younger brother, Ethan, had not just tried to declare him dead. We didn't discuss the call for the rest of the evening because there was no need to feed into their madness. Instead, I poured 2 glasses of iced tea, helped him organize his daily medication box, and made sure he was comfortably settled in the guest bedroom. Early the next morning, under the heavy, humid Arkansas heat, I drove my Ford F-150 toward downtown Little Rock. The morning traffic along Interstate 30 was unusually light, allowing us to arrive at our destination ahead of schedule. We were heading directly to the law office of our family estate attorney, Spencer Croft, a sharp, white-haired man in his early 60s who had handled my grandfather's business affairs for more than 2 decades. Spencer Croft was already waiting for us in his corner office. 2 large paper cups of dark roast coffee rested on the polished mahogany conference table. As soon as we sat down, I explained the bizarre phone call from the previous night, including the disturbing detail that Ethan claimed the entire estate had been left solely to him. Spencer Croft leaned back in his leather chair, a subtle smile touching his lips before his expression turned serious. He pulled a thick, yellowed manila folder from his desk drawer and spread several legal documents across the table. He explained that 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had unexpectedly called his office asking detailed questions about a specific document. That document was an outdated will my grandfather had signed 10 years ago, long before I was added to the estate. Back when Ethan was still considered the sole primary heir after my grandmother passed away, he had somehow found a copy of that old document in an unsecured filing cabinet at my grandfather's old workshop and assumed it was still the active, legally binding version. Spencer Croft shook his head slowly, clarifying that the old will had been officially revoked 5 years earlier when my grandfather updated his estate plan to ensure that I was named an equal co-heir and the primary executor. "Your brother thought he was holding the golden ticket," Spencer Croft said, sliding the current legally valid estate plan toward us. "What he failed to realize is that a 10-year-old draft means absolutely nothing in the eyes of the court once a newer notarized document exists." Then the puzzle of how Ethan had arrived at such a reckless conclusion finally came together. On Monday afternoon, an ambulance had briefly pulled into my grandfather's driveway after he experienced a minor drop in his blood sugar while working in his garden. The paramedics checked his vitals on site, gave him a glass of orange juice, and transported him to the local clinic purely as a precautionary measure. A nosy neighbor had witnessed the emergency vehicles and left a vague, panicked voicemail on my father Daniel Brooks's phone, claiming that my grandfather had been taken away and that the house was sitting completely dark. Driven by greed and sheer impatience, Ethan had called the clinic late Monday night, demanding to know my grandfather's condition. However, because Ethan was not listed as a designated medical representative, the hospital staff strictly enforced federal privacy laws under HIPAA and refused to disclose a single detail about my grandfather's condition. Rather than driving over to check on his own family or simply picking up the phone to call me, Ethan made the wild, arrogant assumption that my grandfather had passed away during the night. He assumed that the lack of information meant the absolute worst, and instead of grieving, his very first instinct was to rush to claim the inheritance before anyone else could react. My grandfather stared out the high-rise window at the Little Rock skyline, resting both hands on the handle of his wooden cane. The financial betrayal hurt him, but the realization that his own grandson was eagerly waiting for his death cut far deeper. Spencer Croft warned us that while Ethan's premature announcement had failed miserably, his desperation for money meant he would likely look for another angle to contest the estate. As we stood to leave the law office, my grandfather turned to Spencer Croft and instructed him to review every single asset account connected to the family timberland, determined to protect what was rightfully ours. By Thursday afternoon, the quiet rhythm of our week was broken when my father Daniel Brooks' Ford F-150 pulled aggressively into my driveway. The heavy truck engine died abruptly, and 3 doors slammed shut almost in unison. Through my living room window, I watched Dad, Mom, and Ethan march up the concrete walkway toward my front porch. There was no trace of shame or embarrassment on their faces for the humiliating mistake they had made 2 days earlier. Instead, their postures were stiff with indignation, radiating a bitter determination to regain control of a situation that had completely slipped through their fingers. I opened the door before they could shatter the silence with pounding fists, stepping aside to let them into the hallway. Mom immediately brushed past me without making eye contact, heading straight for the dining room, where Grandpa Arthur sat reading his morning newspaper. Dad stood in the middle of the living room, folding his arms tightly across his chest, while Ethan hovered just behind him with a thick leather folder tucked securely under one arm. "We need to talk about what happened on Tuesday," Dad said, his voice deep and raspy from years of smoking. "You embarrassed this entire family, Lily, playing childish games with video calls while your grandfather's mind is clearly declining." I narrowed my eyes, feeling a flash of anger rise in my chest. Before I could say a single word, Grandpa Arthur lowered his newspaper and looked over the top of his reading glasses. "My mind is as sharp as the day I built my first workshop," he said calmly, though his knuckles turned white as they gripped the edges of the paper. "The only foolish game played this week was Ethan announcing my death so he could line his pockets." Mom stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on the wooden dining table while looking down at Grandpa Arthur with patronizing pity. "You're 74 years old, Arthur, and living here with Lily has completely distorted your judgment," she argued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You were admitted to the hospital earlier this week, and you're clearly no longer capable of managing the stress of running a 500-acre timber estate." Without waiting for a response, Ethan unzipped his leather folder and slapped a stack of freshly printed legal documents onto the table beside Grandpa Arthur's coffee mug. He pushed a heavy metal pen toward him, pointing at the signature lines marked with bright yellow tabs. The documents were pre-drafted property transfer deeds designed to immediately transfer the entire timberland and commercial workshop into Ethan's personal LLC, effectively stripping my grandfather of every asset he owned. This is about preserving the family legacy before a stranger or bad advice ruins everything you built, Ethan said flatly, refusing to meet my eyes. Sign the timberland over to my business today, and we'll make sure your medical expenses and living arrangements are handled quietly, without any more public spectacle. I stepped between Ethan and the table, staring directly at my father. He's fully capable of managing his own life, and you know damn well this isn't about preserving the family legacy. It's about paying off Ethan's failed business ventures. Dad took an aggressive step toward me, raising a finger in accusation. Stay out of this, Lily. You've been manipulating him ever since his knee surgery, isolating him from the rest of us so you can secure a bigger share of his money. Grandpa Arthur slowly rose from his chair, leaning heavily on his wooden cane for balance, yet his posture remained tall and commanding. He picked up the transfer deeds, glanced at the title pages for only a moment, then deliberately tore the entire stack straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper echoed sharply through the room as he tossed the shredded pieces directly onto Dad's boots. "Get out of my granddaughter's house," Grandpa Arthur commanded, his voice trembling with genuine rage, "and don't ever set foot on my land again." Dad's face flushed bright red with embarrassment. He turned on his heel and headed for the front door without another word. Mom followed close behind, muttering bitterly under her breath about how ungrateful we were. Ethan lingered on the front porch for another moment, his eyes hardening into something dark and ruthless. "You think tearing up a few papers protects you, old man?" Ethan sneered coldly. "By tomorrow morning, my attorney will be filing a formal petition for emergency guardianship in the Pulaski County Probate Court. We'll let a judge declare you legally incompetent, and I'll take control of every single dollar you own, whether you like it or not." 10 days after Ethan's threat, a process server walked up my front porch steps and handed me the formal court summons. The thick legal packet contained Ethan's petition, filed with the Pulaski County Probate Court, requesting an emergency hearing to place my grandfather under court-ordered guardianship. Instead of fabricating outrageous lies that could be easily disproved, Ethan had cleverly weaponized ordinary everyday events, twisting them into alarming signs of severe mental decline. He highlighted a minor incident from 6 months earlier when Grandpa Arthur backed his truck into a wooden fence post at his workshop, leaving nothing more than a small scratch on the rear bumper. Ethan also documented a missed cardiology appointment from the previous winter, along with a duplicate electric bill payment Grandpa Arthur made online after forgetting he had already paid it 2 days earlier. I took the paperwork directly to Spencer Croft, who advised us that the most effective way to dismantle Ethan's petition before the hearing was to arrange an independent cognitive evaluation. He immediately scheduled an appointment at Little Rock Medical Center with an independent geriatric psychiatrist, Dr. Gerald Shaw, a highly respected specialist whose evaluations carried significant weight in probate court proceedings. 2 mornings later, I drove Grandpa Arthur to the medical center and sat quietly in the waiting room while Dr. Gerald Shaw conducted a comprehensive 2-hour clinical assessment. The examination included standardized memory tests, complex mathematical calculations, spatial awareness exercises, and detailed questions about my grandfather's ability to manage his finances and perform his daily activities independently. When the heavy wooden office door finally opened, Dr. Gerald Shaw stepped out with a polite smile, holding a clipboard filled with detailed assessment notes. He handed my grandfather a copy of the official evaluation report, confirming that he had passed every section of the cognitive assessment with exceptional scores for a 74-year-old man. Dr. Gerald Shaw assured us that Grandpa Arthur demonstrated complete mental capacity, flawless reasoning skills, and a thorough understanding of both his estate and his medical decisions. Despite the reassuring medical validation, the drive back to my house was wrapped in a heavy, painful silence. Grandpa Arthur stared blankly out the passenger side window at the passing trees lining the highway, resting his chin on his weathered hands. The realization that his own son and grandson had forced him to undergo a humiliating psychiatric evaluation simply to strip away his independence weighed far more heavily on his heart than any financial dispute ever could. Being forced to prove his sanity to a complete stranger because of his own family's greed had taken away a piece of his dignity that no glowing medical report could ever truly restore. Meanwhile, Karen Brooks began actively waging a vicious slander campaign throughout our extended family and the local church community across central Arkansas. Karen Brooks called relatives, claiming that my grandfather was rapidly losing his mind and that I was cruelly isolating him from his children so I could manipulate his will in my favor. During a routine trip to the local supermarket, an old family friend pulled her shopping cart away from me, whispering loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear that I was taking advantage of an elderly man. That evening, I sat beside Grandpa Arthur on the porch as the humid southern night settled over the timber yard. He held the medical report in his hands, quietly pointing to Dr. Gerald Shaw's written confirmation that affirmed his sharp mind. He looked at me with a sad, weary expression and asked why the people he had spent his entire life protecting and supporting were now treating his silver hair and stiff knee as proof that he no longer belonged in his own home. While we were preparing our defense for the court hearing, attorney Spencer Croft called with critical findings from the bank. He asked us to come to his downtown Little Rock office immediately, his voice unusually grim over the speakerphone. When Grandpa Arthur and I arrived 20 minutes later, Spencer Croft had several thick stacks of financial ledgers spread across his polished mahogany conference table, each marked with bright red tabs. He explained that after Ethan filed the guardianship petition claiming my grandfather was losing control of his finances, he had obtained the legal authority to audit every bank account connected to the commercial timber business over the previous 4 years. What he uncovered was not the story of an elderly man becoming careless with his money. It was a calculated, systematic theft of his life savings. 2 years earlier, Grandpa Arthur had undergone major cataract surgery that temporarily impaired his vision for nearly 4 months. During his recovery, he signed a limited financial power of attorney, granting my father, Daniel Brooks, and Ethan temporary authority to handle routine equipment maintenance and pay operating expenses for the timber yard. That temporary authority was supposed to end the moment my grandfather returned to work. Instead, Ethan had quietly kept the secondary authorization active on the primary business account. Spencer Croft tapped his pen against a detailed spreadsheet highlighting dozens of suspicious wire transfers made over 24 consecutive months. Instead of paying legitimate lumber suppliers, Ethan had created fake invoices for imaginary machinery upgrades and structural repairs at the workshop. Using those fraudulent documents, he authorized repeated transfers directly into a shell contracting company registered under his own name, siphoning off a staggering total of $320,000 right under my grandfather's nose. The sheer scale of the theft left Grandpa Arthur visibly stunned, his hands trembling as he traced his finger down the long column of stolen funds. Every single transaction carried the authorization of his own son and grandson, the 2 people he had trusted without question while recovering from surgery. Spencer Croft revealed that Ethan had not invested the money into a legitimate business. Instead, he had squandered every dollar on high-risk speculative real estate investments in coastal Florida that collapsed during the recent market downturn. Facing bankruptcy and relentless pressure from creditors closing in on his failing contracting company, Ethan's sudden desperation became painfully clear. He had never become concerned about Grandpa Arthur's mental health or preserving the family legacy after seeing an ambulance at the house. He was drowning in financial ruin. Declaring my grandfather mentally incompetent through a court-ordered guardianship was simply his desperate attempt to seize control of the entire timber estate before anyone uncovered the missing money. I looked at Spencer Croft and asked whether these bank records would be enough to present directly to the probate judge during the upcoming hearing. Spencer Croft assured us that the paper trail transformed our position from a defensive case into a devastating legal counterattack. Under Arkansas law, using a power of attorney to transfer an elderly relative's money into personal business accounts without explicit written authorization constitutes serious elder financial exploitation, carrying both substantial civil liability and criminal penalties. Grandpa Arthur leaned back in his leather chair and closed his eyes tightly as the truth settled over him in the quiet office. He had spent decades working long hours beneath the hot southern sun to build a secure future for his family, only to discover that his own flesh and blood had treated his life's work like an open bank account. He picked up the financial statements, gripping them firmly in his weathered hands, and instructed Spencer Croft to attach every single page to our official court filing. 2 days before the court hearing, Spencer Croft handed us a printed file containing text messages subpoenaed from Ethan's phone. The court-ordered digital records revealed a lengthy, unfiltered conversation between Ethan and my father spanning the previous 6 months. As Grandpa Arthur adjusted his reading glasses and carefully studied the transcripts spread across the mahogany desk, the cold arrogance preserved in those messages shattered whatever quiet hope he had still been holding on to. In one particularly revealing exchange, sent only weeks after the fraudulent transfers began, my father asked Ethan whether he was worried Grandpa Arthur might eventually audit the timber business accounts. Ethan's reply was short, dismissive, and dripping with contempt. "The old man will never take this to court," he had written without hesitation. "He'd rather swallow the loss than embarrass the Brooks family name across Little Rock. He always forgives us anyway." That single sentence exposed the rotten foundation beneath their entire scheme. For decades, whenever Ethan found himself buried beneath another failed business venture, Grandpa Arthur had quietly stepped in, writing check after check to protect the family's reputation and give his grandson another chance. My father and Ethan had never bothered covering their tracks perfectly because they believed their legal scheme was foolproof. They acted with complete confidence because they believed Grandpa Arthur was too gentle, too afraid of public embarrassment, and too devoted to his family to ever hold them accountable. The realization that his lifelong generosity had been mistaken for weakness changed something deep inside my grandfather. The wounded uncertainty that had lingered on his face since Ethan's phone call disappeared, replaced by a quiet, unwavering resolve. He laid the transcript back onto Spencer Croft's desk and looked up with steady eyes. "They built their entire plan on the assumption that I would stay silent to protect them," Grandpa Arthur said, his voice calm and completely free of anger. "It's time to show them that my kindness was never permission to rob me." Without a moment's hesitation, Grandpa Arthur instructed Spencer Croft to immediately draft a completely revised estate plan and revoke every previous testamentary document. He formally disinherited both my father and Ethan, ensuring that neither of them would ever receive a single acre of the timberland or a single dollar from his personal savings. Under the terms of the new, legally airtight estate plan, Grandpa Arthur established an irrevocable living trust to provide for his healthcare, housing, and personal needs for the remainder of his life, managed by an independent professional trustee. Upon his eventual passing, his primary residence, along with half of the 500-acre timber property, was designated directly to me. The remaining portion of the estate was designated to establish a permanent forestry scholarship foundation at a local Arkansas university, helping hard-working students pursue degrees in land conservation and sustainable timber management. When Spencer Croft presented the finalized documents an hour later, Grandpa Arthur signed every page with a firm, steady hand, while 2 legal assistants witnessed and notarized each signature. He picked up his wooden cane, stood tall without needing any assistance, and looked out the window overlooking the city streets. For the first time in weeks, He looked like the strong, self-reliant man who had spent 40 years building a thriving timber business from the rugged southern soil. As we walked out of the law office into the warm afternoon sunshine, Grandpa Arthur paused beside my truck, resting one hand on the warm hood. He looked at me with a quiet sense of peace in his eyes. Setting boundaries with the people you love is often the hardest work a person will ever do, he said softly. But holding on to your dignity is always worth the painful clarity that comes with it. On a humid Wednesday morning, we climbed the stone steps of the Pulaski County Courthouse for the guardianship hearing. The vaulted courtroom was silent as the probate judge called the case to order, prompting Ethan's attorney to immediately present the petition. They attempted to paint a picture of severe cognitive decline, repeatedly pointing to the minor scrape on the fence at the workshop and the missed medical appointment from months earlier. Ethan sat confidently at the petitioner's table, resting his elbows on the polished oak surface as though the timberland already belonged to him. When it was our turn, Spencer Croft rose calmly and dismantled their entire fabricated narrative within minutes. He first introduced the comprehensive medical evaluation signed by Dr. Gerald Shaw, which clearly established that Grandpa Arthur possessed excellent cognitive health and full mental capacity. Spencer Croft then presented the certified bank records documenting the systematic theft of $320,000, along with the subpoenaed text messages in which Ethan openly boasted that Grandpa Arthur would never pursue legal action. The atmosphere inside the courtroom changed instantly as the judge carefully reviewed the financial records and text message transcripts. Cornered by the overwhelming evidence, Ethan completely lost his composure. He spun toward my father and shouted that the entire fraudulent scheme had been Dad's idea from the very beginning. Dad exploded in anger, slamming both fists onto the table and yelling back that Ethan was the one who had wasted the stolen money on disastrous real estate investments. Their frantic shouting match continued until the judge repeatedly struck her gavel, demanding order in her courtroom. Without leaving the bench, the probate judge issued her ruling. She formally dismissed Ethan's guardianship petition with prejudice, stating that Grandpa Arthur had demonstrated exceptional mental clarity throughout the proceedings. She also publicly reprimanded both my father and Ethan for attempting to misuse the judicial system to conceal serious financial exploitation. Furthermore, the judge referred the entire case file, along with the financial audit, directly to the Pulaski County District Attorney for civil recovery proceedings and a criminal investigation. The legal consequences unfolded quickly over the following months as law enforcement initiated formal proceedings against both of them. To avoid immediate criminal prosecution and satisfy the civil restitution judgment, Daniel Brooks and Ethan were forced to sell their home in Little Rock to repay the full $320,000 they owed to Grandpa Arthur's estate. Left with nothing but damaged reputations and overwhelming debt, they appeared on my front porch one evening, desperately begging for forgiveness and pleading with Grandpa Arthur to drop the remaining legal claims. Grandpa Arthur slowly walked to the front door and looked at his son and grandson through the glass panel with complete calm. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply told them that forgiveness did not require enabling toxic behavior, nor did it mean allowing dishonest people back into his life. Then he quietly closed the heavy wooden door, locked it, and walked back to his favorite armchair in the living room, permanently ending all contact with them. We returned to our peaceful routine on the timber property outside Little Rock, enjoying the peace and dignity Grandpa Arthur had fought so hard to protect. Surrounded by the towering pine trees he had spent 40 years cultivating, he lived comfortably, knowing that his life's work was finally safe from the greed that had nearly torn it apart. This journey reminds us that true family is built on genuine love, trust, and mutual respect, not simply shared blood. Standing up for the people we love and maintaining firm boundaries against betrayal, even when it comes from those closest to us, is essential to protecting both our integrity and our peace of mind. Thank you so much for listening to our story all the way to the end. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts or personal experiences in the comments below.